Hi, I'm Missy with On William Street. Welcome back. This week we are going to talk about curves, and with one of our latest patterns we have 3 different sizes of curves that we're going to go over, and the 2 different ways that you can put those curves together to make it a little bit easier to work on this quilt and any other quilt that involves curves, especially those little curves. So the first thing we're going to start off with is big curves. So this one, it's a nice 8.5 inch curve, Drunkard's Path block. These ones are really easy to put together. We use the pin method. So what you're going to do is you take your block, match your piece up with your curve so that it will lay backwards for it, and you're going to just throw in a couple of pins as you go around that curve. And however many pins you want is really up to you. It's your comfort level. I have a tendency to use a lot of pins, especially when I'm doing curves, just to make sure that those stay nice and smooth on me. I know some people are really good with curves and they can throw in just a couple of pins and then just go to the sewing machine and go. So I like to start off with my outside curves and then just kind of follow it along with my fingers to get it to that middle. You could also fold this in half too, if you're worried about getting that exact middle, so that you can have a crease in there to find that. But I like to just fold it in half and then let's throw in another pin in here. And get my fingers to line up. And then one more on this side, and then we're going to take it to the machine and I'm going to show you how easy it is to sew those curves when they're nice and big like this. And this is the method I would use for anything over like a 4.5 inch size curve and up. This method works really well. Okay, so now we're going to take those curves over to the machine and we're going to start sewing. So one thing that I do like to do is I like to sew with the needle down when I'm doing these curves, because it just helps keep everything in place as you're sewing, and you stop, it holds that needle into the fabric. And we're just going to ease these in with our fingers. And just kind of keep them lined up as nice as we can. One thing that I find that I have a tendency to use is just keep a pin in my hand. Help fold that over and keep things lined up. I know some people use tweezers for this. I've just never gotten around to buying any tweezers, and a pin works just fine, so I just stick with my pin. Just make sure you're not sewing over your pins. You'll end up breaking your needles, and you'll find out that you end up going through a lot of needles when you do that. So you don't want to do that. So we'll keep just holding that on with our finger, keeping it in place. Go around nice and smooth. And then you can also, I am using my walking foot for this. You do not need to use a walking foot when you're making curves. You can use your regular foot, your 1/4 inch foot, whichever you prefer. I just find that I use my walking foot for everything anymore, and it's just always on my machine, and I honestly don't even think about it anymore. So don't worry, don't think that you need to run out and buy a walking foot in order to do curves. You can do this with just your regular foot as well. Okay, as we're getting close to that end, we want to make sure that things are still lining up just like they're supposed to. Pull that pin out. This works well because I can kind of fold down that fabric that's in the back that kind of gathers a little bit as I'm going. And then you want to just make sure that you keep this nice and tight towards the end. We don't want to end up with a bunch of white fabric left over at the end of that curve. And there we go. There is our first curve. We'll go ahead and pull it out of the machine. And then we can take it over to the iron and press that. And then we've got our first curve done and ready to go. This works really well for any of your larger curves, this traditional method. It just makes it super easy. The curves are when they're nice and large like this, it goes together really easy, really fast without any issues. And then we're going to show you a trick to use for those smaller curves that will make them so much easier than following this method. Okay, now we are going to work on our small curves. So these are a very small drunkard's path block, 2.5 inches, and this method is going to be so much easier to put these together than using the traditional pin method. So this is a method that we learned when we were inserting a circle. So that's something that will work for your circles, but we also learned that it works really well for these small curves as well. It would also work for a half circle if you were working on a half circle block. So what we're going to do is we have our template. So this is what we use to cut out all of our pieces. And we're going to take our scissors and we're just going to cut along that seam line. So we're going to cut off that 1/4 inch seam. So this is what we're going to end up with, is that template with the seam removed. Then we're going to take that template with our fabric. Make sure you have, if you're using printed fabric, you have your print facing down. We're using solids, so there really isn't a right side up for this, but if you are using prints, you want to make sure that you have right side down so that it will all come out correct in the end. Otherwise, your print's going to be on the back of your curve. And then we're going to just snip around that curve a little bit. It does not need to be all the way to the line. Just make a few snips just to help fold this over and iron it a little bit easier. So you can go ahead and start off with a finger press. If I can get my finger underneath. And we want to fold that so that it is meeting up nicely with that template. Just give it a nice finger press all the way around, and then we will take it over to the iron and press it there. Okay, so now we're going to bring our iron in. Just got our finger press done to kind of get us started. Take that iron and give it a nice press. Make sure you don't burn your fingers as you're doing this. Okay, nice good press there. Then we're going to bring our piece back over here and we're going to take our glue stick. So this is a Soline fabric glue stick. You do not need to have a fabric glue stick for this method. You can use any type of, even just a school Elmer's glue. You just want to make sure that it is a washable glue because you want that to come out of your fabric. So just make sure that it's washable and then you should be good to go. So we're just going to put a little bit of glue along this curve. And we're going to line our curved piece up right there with it. Make sure that it's lined up just nicely there, all the way around. You can kind of fold it over and check, make sure it's all nicely matched up. Move this side down just a little bit. There we go. Okay, give it a nice press so that glue holds it in place, and then we will take it over to our machine and we will sew that curve together. Okay, so now we are going to sew along this curve, and what you're going to do is right along that fold line, we fold it and iron, that is where you're going to sew your seam, and that's going to give you a 1/4 inch seam. It's also going to give you a really nice curve. And then have your trusty pin or your tweezers, whatever handy that you like to use, just to help guide that along. Normally I have a leader on this so that my threads don't get jumbled up like they just did at the beginning, but we'll be able to fix those later. Keep that folded over, and I also like to sew with my needle down. Just kind of helps keep things in place a little easier as you go around that, because then it's going to hold that fabric so you can lift it up, make sure things are folded, and then keep going around that curve. Glue's taking that top part a little, just a little bit too, so pull that off. Get that folded like it's supposed to. Whoops. Lost my pin. Okay, there we go. Now we have our curved piece nice and complete, and we'll take that over to the iron and give it a nice press, and then we are ready to sew it into our blocks. So this method again is great for small curves. You could use it for big curves. You can use it for inserting a circle into your pieced blocks as well if that's what you want to work on. So this is just something that we learned doing that method, but it works really well for these smaller curves or even a half circle. So go ahead and try that out and see how it works for you. Thank you for joining us this week. We hope you've learned something to help you with those big curves and also with those smaller curves, just to make your quilt go together just a little bit easier. If you've liked what you've seen, please remember to follow us on Instagram, on Facebook, and then also subscribe to YouTube so that you don't miss any of our videos in the future. We also have our newsletter that you can sign up for online on our website so that you can know when all of the videos and everything's coming out and what we're working on. See you next week. Bye.